Greetings. This is Michael Jackman, Senior Lecturer in Writing at Indiana University Southeast. Today's video podcast is a critical reflection guide. So, I'm going to explain how and why I use reflections and interactions in my classes. I'm doing this as a way to encourage you to use these tools more successfully and deeply in our class. If you do, your learning will be more solid and satisfying, and as an additional benefit, your grades should also go up. Now, what is critical reflection? In a nutshell, it's a way for students to make their learning deeper and more permanent. We have two areas in my courses where I ask students to do what is known as critical reflection. These areas in assignments are reflections, of course, and interactions, as you're familiar with. For the most part, we use the discussion tool to present these student writings. So you can see why I consider the discussion tool critical to the success of the course and why I ask students to interact more and to reflect more with depth as part of the requirements for my course. Now, there are three areas known as domains that I ask students to explore in critical reflection. They're called affect, cognition, and behavior. Now, those are the technical terms, but to put it simply, the three domains are emotions, beliefs and ideas, and behaviors or actions. When you reflect, emotions get at how do I feel about something. Beliefs and ideas ask students to think about how these are being challenged or reinforced or maybe assumed or might be changing. Behaviors want students to explore actions they or others took or are taking, and it could be from working with a community organization in my community service learning course, or it could be writing a poem. So by exploring these three domains, emotions, beliefs and ideas, and behaviors or actions, students thoroughly explore with depth and completeness the experiences they've had and the learning in the course. When you make critical reflections, exploring all three areas are considered equally important, which is why I'm always pushing students to make longer and more frequent responses to other students, to have a continuing conversation, because so many valuable emotions, beliefs, and behaviors can be unlocked when students participate as a community. Okay, now here's a table that lists a set of criteria or what we look for in a successful critical reflection. Now there's a lot here, and every reflection is not going to contain everything, but it is a goal. Notice that after each criteria, the next column lists strategies you use when writing reflections. And finally, the last column gives you self-check questions. Asking yourself these questions when writing will make your reflections and interactions with other students stronger. For instance, here's the concept of integration, which means the ability to use reflection to make a connection or a relationship between experiences or assignment activities and the course content. To give two quick examples, let's say you've done a reading that defines and explains the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I've asked you to remember experiences you've had in the classroom that relate to this topic. In reflecting on the experiences, you'll want to incorporate the study material, showing integration, showing a relationship on how you've learned, on what you've learned can apply to what you've experienced. Or even, let's say, I've assigned a lesson on what makes a strong line in a poem, and I've asked you to write a poem, which is your activity or experience, and then reflect on where you feel your poem is stronger or weaker. In your reflection, you want to integrate the lesson as you considered your activity that you did and what you might do in the future and what might change about your emotions, beliefs, and your behaviors. So, when preparing your reflection, you could ask yourself one of the suggested questions, like, have I clearly shown the connection between my experience and my learning? Okay, so as I said, the table is a lot of criteria. There are 10 here, and not all of them will always apply, but even if you pick the top 3 or 5, your reflections will be so much stronger and more meaningful. In the same way, I want you to interact with your peers by making connections between their reflections and your own. I want a conversation to happen, which becomes a new activity to create new, deeper, and more permanent learning. So you might wonder, how do I assess these critical reflections? How do I know how good they are? What are the criteria for successful assignments? This final table shows how I might assess critical reflections using a rubric later in the course. Here's an example of 3 criteria: integration, precision, and depth. You can see that a student reflection or interaction with peers that has the strongest integration provides thorough and clear connections between the experience and learning, whereas a weaker assignment will not show as many connections, or that the integration with course material isn't very clear, and so on down the list. Don't forget, I consider the discussion tool in Canvas a key part of learning. Through community conversations that have depth and relevance, and not just a place to post short positive comments with maybe one quick piece of information. In case your other courses set up student responses differently, this podcast ought to help you make a successful transition to this level of required work.